If there is one thing that's lacking amongst believers, not lack because we're not provided for, lacking in the sense that we don't use it. Okay, let me explain. You can have a bicycle in your possession because your parents gave you the bicycle. And it's a good bicycle also. But let's say you forgot that you had that bicycle and you are walking long distances, or you are spending money for public transport, even though we have a very expensive bicycle in your possession. In that sense, you are lacking the use of the bicycle, not because the bicycle is not available unto you. So that's what I mean in this sense, that the thing that believers lack to use is sound judgment. When a lot of folks think about judgment, they think of some guy wearing black and white, which is Masonic, hitting a hammer and sentencing someone to jail. That's what a lot of folks think with judgment. They have this sense of dread that something bad's about to happen. Well, that's what society conditions you into. Judgment in itself is a tool to secure safety and the sanity of a population. Let me repeat that. Judgment is a tool to secure, that implies to protect and to guarantee the well-being and sanity, which includes mental and emotional sanity of a population. So, sound judgment is necessary for every group and every ethnicity. No group of people, that means no ethnicity, can stand without sound judgment. That is not possible. And pagans know this. So pagans are dedicated to exercise sound judgment. Even though they are deceived and in darkness because they're not in line with Christ, they understand the value and necessity of sound judgment. In the Old Testament era, you had elders amongst the Israelites who were charged by the Most High himself to exercise sound judgment on their own people. For example, you had the tribe of Reuben, and within the tribe of Reuben you had the elders of Reuben, and they were the ones that judged in domestic affairs, whether it comes down to divorces or domestic violence, or when children go astray. The elders of Reuben, in this case, were appointed to judge in the matter. That's how it were amongst all the tribes of Israel. And this model of elders bringing sound judgment, you can find it with other nations and ethnicities throughout history. Now, why did I say at the beginning of this video that believers often lack the use of sound judgment? It is because if believers collectively, I'm not talking individually, if collectively believers everywhere would agree to sound judgment as Christ commands of us, then much, I would say 95% of all the evil around us would disappear, just like that. Christ said, I gave you. It didn't just mean individually. That is both individually as well as collectively. Now, as a collective, you stand stronger than as an individual. So what Christ said counts, first of all, for the collective, all believers together, as well as for the individual. So Christ said to believers in general, he spoke to us as a group, he said, I gave you power to tread upon scorpions and serpents and the whole camp of the enemy, and nothing shall by no means harm you. What did he say there? Nothing by no means shall harm you. That's a double denial. Nothing shall harm you. By no means nothing will harm you. He could have said it in one of two ways, but he used a double denial, so he repeated himself. in the same sentence. That reveals that it's very important. That's how they did it in ancient times. When something was important, they would repeat it. Nothing shall by no means harm you. So as believers, collectively, nothing shall harm us when we walk in the power of Christ, which includes sound judgment. If there is no sound judgment, evil has free reign. What I mean with free reign is that evil can expand and abound without any hinder. Eventually, evil is always self-destructive, so it will destroy itself, but if there is no sound judgment, evil can flourish at the expense of the community, and many are devoured and destroyed. So to overcome and overrule evil, and in some cases to eliminate evil completely, there needs to be sound judgment. Okay, I'm going to give some examples so you understand what I'm saying here. Let's say you have an employer, okay? You have this Chinese employer, he hires other Chinese folks. He has this farm, big farm. And every evening, people from a Chinese village nearby come to work for him. One day, the people came, as usual, to work. But this time, he had police officers coming at them, because the owner called the cops on them saying that people were trespassing his property. So when the police was there, the police noticed that something didn't add up. Because the people that were so-called trespassing his property were poor folks. And those poor folks didn't have any arms with them. They didn't even had any, let me say, materials with them to carry any loot. So the police officers at the scene noticed that something's wrong here. So the police officers told the people to go home. And the next day, when they found out that those Chinese folks that came to that property, that they worked for him, and they also found out that this employer did not report that he was employing people, they arrested him. And when they arrested him, they told him that he had to face a judge. So when he had appeared before court, he had his lawyer with him, and he had this story of how he was mistreated because his property was trespassed upon, and he was arrested. Then the judge told him, the judge asked him, "Sir, did you hire those people to work on your farm?" He said, "Yes." "Did you report that you are an employer?" He said, "No." "So you know now that you broke the law right over there, because you made people work for you without registering it with taxation services." And the guy said, "Yes, that's true, Your Honor." Then the judge asked again, "So that evening, when those people came to work for you as they usually do, why did you call the cops?" And the judge said, "I don't want to hear about trespassing." And then the man said, "Your Honor, I was fed up and I just didn't want those people around." But then the judge asked, wasn't you yourself that agreed with them they would work for you? So you had your issues somewhere and now you decide to take it out on them by pretending that they were trespassing even though you agreed with them they could work with you? So now you used our legal system to vent your frustrations on a group of people that intended you no harm, even people who were dependent on you financially, yet you claim to be the victim? Are you out of your mind? The accused one was completely quiet, and everyone in the courtroom agreed with the judge. Even the lawyer of the accused one agreed with the judge that the Chinese man went way too far. So the man was sentenced, and he had to pay compensation to the people he scammed. Now, in this case, there was sound judgment from the judge. And there was also sound judgment from the police officers at the scene because they looked at the whole situation and realized something doesn't add up here. But what if there was no sound judgment? In that case, this man would have gotten away with narcissistic violence. And those other folks who were being used and exploited would now feel victimized. And now they would report to others, relatives, friends, that they've been victimized. And that will breed resentment against the government and against the leaders. And sooner or later, this resentment is going to work out in violence. And now the whole community becomes sick with violence and with anxiety. So sound judgment in this case hindered evil from expanding in the community. Okay, let me give another example. Let's say you have a female that claims to be stalked by someone. Okay? And let's say now that she tells she tells her boyfriend that she's being stalked, and the boyfriend decides to take action immediately without checking out her story, because he's so-called in love or dependent on sexual affection. So he just believes her. Just like that. Let's say the alleged stalker is dealt with by the boyfriend and his friends. And that alleged stalker ends up in hospital. And later, they found out it was all a lie, that she was just whoring for attention by lying on someone else. They even found out that she was the one that kept calling the guy, asking for help. And even when the guy said that she had to stop calling him, she kept on calling him. But she was pretending as if he was the one stalking her. In this case, there was no sound judgment. In this case, you had enablers, in this case the boyfriend and other males who were codependent. They enabled this female narcissist by acting out on her behalf. And by doing that, they caused harm to the community. And now there's a cycle of violence that has emerged that will haunt that community. Now, if there was sound judgment, some would say, oh, he's allegedly stalking you. Why didn't you just block the phone number? Why didn't you just do that? Well, no. You can block someone's phone number, right? Why didn't you do it? No. So you don't want to take actions to preserve your safety, but you do want to complain all the time. What are you doing? If there was sound judgment, she would have been exposed immediately. But that's the thing with many believers today. I said many believers, not all believers. Many believers today have no sound judgment at all. Why? Because those Babylon churches convinced them that they should never judge at all. Now you have folks that have their prejudices and they want to act out the prejudices without being challenged. Now, I agree that that shouldn't happen because that's acting out condemnation. So if that's what people want to do, acting out the prejudices unchallenged, then I agree. It shouldn't happen. However, if it comes to natural discernment of a situation, that should happen all the time. Okay, let me give another example. Let's say you have a congregation and you have this individual that comes there. Let's say you have some female that's the quote-unquote victim of a domestic violence situation. And she comes at a local church asking for help. And she receives help. People are warm towards her. People give her a roof over her head from time to time. So people are supportive of her. They don't condemn her, saying it's her own fault and all of that. No, they are loving and kind towards her. Okay, you would say this is a good thing. But let's look at the bigger picture. If you sense there's danger, the first thing you should do is check out where the danger comes from. Secondly, Once you identify where the danger comes from, you should remove yourself from the danger. That's a natural, responsible thing to do. If you have someone that became the target of a domestic violence situation, and he or she, because there are also males that are the target of domestic violence, if he or she flees for safety and they want long-term solutions, okay, then that's good. This is an individual that needed help and needed to be rescued, and he or she acknowledged the fact that they had to be rescued, and they do not want to go back to the situation no matter what. That's a real victim seeking solutions. Real victims always seek solutions. Remember that. Real victims always seek solutions because they are realistic. But let's say now you have a congregation or a local church and you have this female that's there often, but she's always in a domestic violence situation. And later they found out that she kept going back to the same guy that had loose hands towards her. And they also found out she was talking bad. She was bad mouthing the people from that church behind their backs. But at the same time, she would often come to seek sympathy from people from that local church. Now, if the people from the congregation find out about all of this, what should they do? They should ban her from coming there, and they should report her to the authorities. Why? Because she was abusing the congregation and she was endangering the congregation. Because what if that weird boyfriend or whoever she's with decides to take out his rage on that congregation? What if she was involved with a drug dealer or some psycho criminal, and she was complaining all the time about people from that church, except the people of that church were harassing her, and that guy decides to punish people from that church? So she was endangering the congregation and at the same time drawing sympathy from them. So she was abusing them. But let's say the people from the congregation aren't aware of what she's doing outside, but they notice that she's always in some kind of weird situation. There's no solution anytime, and it's months pass by. In this case, the elders within that congregation should tell people from that congregation that they ought to avoid that energy vampire. The elders of that congregation should judge the situation for what it is, seen as something doesn't add up, in order to preserve the safety and the sanity of the congregation. That's what ought to happen. But what often happens in those churches, I call them Babylon churches, is that you have abusers that come to take advantage of the congregation, and instead of the elders judging the situation for what it is, they allow it to happen out of love. At least what the world considers love. And then you have some of the members of the congregation that end up sick, or they end up victimized, or fatalities occur. And when fatalities occur, people just bury those folks, they weep about them, and then they continue business as usual. That's how it goes in those Babylon churches. Where is the sound judgment? I'm not saying that there is no church at all out there with sound judgment. There are some of them, but in general, those churches lack sound judgment. They don't discern things for what they are. As believers, it's very important for us to exercise sound judgment. To exercise sound judgment also implies that we ought to unlearn all the ungodly, worldly concepts that the world promotes. And look at this. Look at this for a moment. If someone owns a property, but they're growing drugs on that property, what's going to happen? Law enforcement will come, arrest the individual, and the individual will likely lose that property. But folks will say, what is his private property? The government, I would say the judge would tell you that private property is just a fiction. Nobody owns anything naturally on the earth. So that he had that property, that's something the community and the state enabled him to have. And in return, he had to comply with the system. He didn't comply, so they took the property from him. That's what the judge would tell you. They would admit, in an honest way, that private property is just a fiction. And they would make plain that they will not enable harm on the community just to preserve a fiction. If someone is renting a flat, and in that flat he abuses one of his own children, he'll go to jail. And if the landlord was aware of it, but he didn't intervene, he will be charged also. And if the landlord would say, but I don't want to invade his privacy, he paid rent already, so the judge would tell him the well-being of the community is more important than your income. You enabled harm on the community. You broke that means that you broke the law also. That's how it goes. So even with these satanic, Apollo worshipping courthouses, they do not, even with them, there is sound judgment to some extent. They do not tolerate wills out of control. What happens amongst common people? Common people enable predators. They enable narcissists. They enable a lot of evildoers just to be left alone. That's what common people do. So common people in general, they lack sound judgment. They're into their opinions, they're into their likes and dislikes, especially their dislikes. They're into their dumping of negative energy. They're into all of that, all those distractions. But I never mention sound judgment onto them, because they'll become upset. They will feel invaded. They will feel threatened, because you dare to challenge them. Sound judgment challenges people, because sound judgment is as a light that illuminates a room. If the room is dirty, and if there are things in the room that shouldn't be there, the light will reveal it. And remember what's written in the book of John in the New Testament. Those that do evil hate the light. Why? Because they don't want to be exposed. Even in the world without Christ, pagans know that sound judgment is important. And they know that common folks hate sound judgment, because it destroys all their illusions and all their narcissistic attachments. And despite that, the pagans in this world, which includes the legal system, those that compose and exercise the legal system, they exercise and use sound judgment where it's appropriate. And it works. Believers should be far more advanced in the exercise of sound judgment. Don't you know that there are even believers that suffer terminal sicknesses? There are even believers that are haunted by debt. They are haunted by financial distress. There are even believers on prescribed drugs, antidepressant drugs, and all of that. Why? It's because there's a lack of sound judgment amongst believers. Believers ought to be serious when it comes to this. Whenever something doesn't line up with Christ, we should challenge it. Whenever someone, even if someone is a believer, whenever someone is hostile towards Christ because of holding on to ideas and expectations that can't be accounted for, we should keep such an individual at a distance. We shouldn't even associate with such an individual. Now, we cannot become like a cult that avoids society as a whole. No, we're not going to isolate ourselves to some remote island on the Pacific, waiting doomsday to come. No, we're not doing that. We are in contact with unbelievers and people that don't know Christ. We are. So we're not going to take any stance against them, because Christ came for them also. But we are alert. And we can expect unbelievers or people that don't know Christ to have wrong expectations. There is no other way than for them to have wrong expectations. But when those wrong expectations enable danger, we keep such people at a distance. Especially when someone claims to be a believer, yet they persist in darkness. Especially then, we should avoid such an individual. So, use sound judgment. I agree with Christ.